Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, January 1st, 2026. Happy New Year. As we do on this channel, we always start off the beginning of every single month by doing an updated Senate or governor prediction, whichever one decides to come first. This case, we're looking at the U.S. Senate, but I'm really excited for the new year, guys. I hope you had a great New Year's Eve. I spent mine in Washington, D.C., none other than in the nation's capital. Obviously not in the Capitol building, though maybe that could be in due time. But yesterday was fun. Hope you guys had a great evening. And today we are right back into it, getting into the nitty-gritty of the 2026 midterm elections as we are officially in the year of the midterm elections. I think that a lot of people, when they are, thinking about the new year, they think about New Year's resolutions, they think about what they're doing. And obviously I have all of those. I've written down what my goals are for the year. But what I am really, really excited for isn't necessarily self-growth, rather the trajectory in which we are barreling towards the 26 midterms. It's a really exciting time, a lot that's going to happen over the coming year, and in a year's time, we will know who will have won control of the U.S. House, the U.S. Senate, and likely have a significant number of exploratory committees formed ahead of the 2028 presidential election, and then we're right into that primary season. Now, on your screen right now is an entirely blank Senate map here. Obviously, the majority of these states are spoken for. We know how they are going to go just based off of electoral trends and incumbency factors and just the partisanship of a number of these states, but we are going to be focusing on quite a few today, and so I want to start off this video by characterizing all of the states that we consider to be safe. Now, many of you guys, I'm sure if you've watched these videos before, know what safe means, but if you're new to the channel, safe is essentially a state that we can say with certainty will go to one political party by 15 points or more, essentially declaring that that margin is significant enough that we can say concretely, no chance. The opposition party wins these states with the current lineup of candidates, with the current set of circumstances on the national and statewide level, and those states really start to come in and piece together the numbers here on the congressional map here. Now, Senate map here. So looking at the map so far, the Democrats are at 36 seats with my characterization in Illinois and Oregon, but we have quite a few states that we can actually say are going to be, again, with certainty, quite good for the Democratic Party. States like Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Jersey, in previous predictions I had as a likely state. I no longer think it's going to be a likely state. I think we're going to move it over into the safe column, especially given the national environment of 2026. We have New Jersey, we have Delaware, we have Massachusetts. Virginia joins that bunch, especially after the astounding strong showing for the Democrats in 2025. No real reason to believe that with a strong incumbent like Mark Warner in 2026, they are on track for a significant victory. He won by 12 in 2020. In 2026, it's going to be much better than 2020 was for the Democrats, especially on the congressional level. Virginia goes out there as safe blue. I'd say Minnesota joins the ranks as well. When you look at the Republican candidates there, the frontrunner's name is Royce White. If you have any interest in looking at electoral history, you can look at 2024 and look at how poorly he performed despite Donald Trump coming within about 4 points in the state on the presidential level. In 2024, in the Senate race, though, Royce White ended up losing by a pretty significant amount. That race was won by Amy Klobuchar by about 15. And so he is running again for Senate in 2026, this time an open race, but, the Democrats, I think, are going to fare quite well, especially with Mike Lindell as the frontrunner on the GOP governor's side. I'm largely of the opinion that in 2026, Minnesota will be that safe Democratic state. So that brings us to Democrats at roughly 43 seats in the safe column. Republicans, of course, have their own states that they can consider to be safe as well. These are states like Idaho, Wyoming, South Dakota, Montana, Kansas, Oklahoma. These are states that when it's all said and done, we fully expect the Republicans in these races not really to have that significant of a challenge at winning re-election by quite a significant amount, and it really shows the true strength of the Republicans on this map because they have a lot of these states that we can consider to be safe. States like Tennessee, states like Kentucky, that's Mitch McConnell's seat, it's going to be open, but Democrats are certainly not going to come within 15 in that race. West Virginia goes to the GOP, South Carolina goes to the GOP here. No real targets on those states, unlike in 2020. If you remember, Democrats spent $100 million in South Carolina, $90 million in Kentucky, $50 million in Kansas, $100 million in Montana, all to amount to double-digit losses across every single one of these seats. Democrats likely should not be focusing on those races in 2026, barring a financial collapse that would throw some of these states into play, which might happen, might not happen, as we're tracking for today. At the beginning of the year, probably won't, not in time for the midterms at least, and enough that I do think the Republicans will hold on to many of these seats by quite a significant amount. But you might notice that as we finish off and round out these safe states on the Democratic side, some pretty significant omissions. States like Texas aren't safe for the GOP. Alaska's not safe for the GOP. New Hampshire's not safe for the Democrats, right? Michigan is not safe for the Democrats. Nebraska is not safe for the GOP. These are all states that I do adamantly believe will be decided by less than 15-point margins, even if on the presidential level, states like Texas, Florida, Nebraska, and Alaska all went to Donald Trump by nearly that amount, including Ohio and Iowa. Really, my point is that these are states that I think in 2026, given Donald Trump's very low approval rating, given the 2025 races we've seen, given the 2024 race as well, I largely think many of these races will be narrower than I think Republicans would have hoped for on their end, and maybe even some can be some of these things can be said for the Democrats on their side as well. Now, we have 12 races here, but we have likely states that are states to be decided between 5 and 15 points. These are the states where, barring a massive change in trajectory, the party at which is expected to win these likely states will end up winning them come November unless something dramatically changes. I think that we have seen over the past year a lot of these likely states really not change all that much. Maybe some states have moved over into being likely. Maybe some of these states have moved over out of being likely. They've gone back and forth. But for the most part, the majority of these states we're about to characterize are spoken for. The margin is just what we're really focused on. For instance, a great example of this is a state like Nebraska, where you have incumbent Republican Senator Pete Ricketts up against Dan Osborne, an independent who ran in 2024 and came within 6 points of winning a Senate race in a state that Donald Trump won by 21 points. You saw that 21-point margin, 60-39. In the Nebraska Senate race, though, Dan Osborne, not a Democrat, an independent, came within 6. Coincidentally, there was a special election that took place coinciding with that race, which was a more standard Republican versus Dem race. In that race, Pete Ricketts, the Republican now running in 2026, won by 30 points, or roughly 30 points, 26 points across the state. But the point is that Dan Osborne, as the independent, was outrunning that other Senate opposition candidate, which just happened to be a Democrat, by roughly 20 points. Now he's running again in 2026, this time under arguably a better year for the Democratic Party, but simultaneously, arguably, against a better Republican. So Pete Ricketts probably is going to win this race, but when we take a look at the margins here, it is going to be closer to 5 points than it is 15 points, and I do think that Dan Osborne stands an outsized chance with a major change in the race. It could end up with an independent senator from Nebraska, which would be the first in a while, especially one that's not caucusing with either side of the aisle. But it'll be quite interesting to see on the Senate level. So 46 seats there for the GOP with Nebraska. Another state I'd consider to be likely is Alaska. I think just purely on margin, it will narrow down. Dan Sullivan is a strong enough incumbent that I think he wins against almost anyone. That almost anyone caveat means that if someone like Mary Peltola enters into the race, we would entirely reevaluate where the Senate race would go in 2026. For now, though, I'd consider it to be likely just based off margin. Dan Sullivan probably wins by 11 to 12 points. So that brings the Republicans to 47. They also have a likely state out of the state of Florida. This is a state where we know that Marco Rubio vacated the seat, so now it's Ashley Moody who's the incumbent, but we'll see if that primary shakes up to be, strong for the incumbent or not. The point is that Florida has a Senate race up in 2026, which was somewhat unexpected. In either case, the Democrats are probably not going to win this race. They have, again, made inroads in some of these Florida elections. They won Miami. Yes, good signs. To the degree that I think this translates to Democrats winning statewide, no. I think that Florida is going to take a while if you're going to bring it back, right? Remember in 2016, Clinton lost it by 1, Biden lost it by 3, Harris lost it by 13. You don't change those things in under a year or under 2 years in a statewide race. It can happen in a district. It can happen in a special election. It can happen in a city. But to the point that Florida, and also might I mention, the third largest state in the union, would have such a dramatic change in such a short period of time, even if you take the Latino vote share that Kamala Harris, comparing it to Hillary Clinton, you take the Hillary Clinton margin, you take Miami-Dade, you take Broward, you take those county margins, those raw vote margins, Kamala Harris still is down, 7 to 8 points across the state. And so you don't see that just with simple change in 1 or 2 years that Florida will change. I think right now I stand by my prediction. Republicans win Florida and don't even, win it by a narrow amount. I think they win it by nearly 10 points. So you have Florida, you have Alaska, you have Nebraska as likely Republican states. There's one more that I think really aches Democrats, and that is the state of Texas, a state that Donald Trump won by 14, 6 points, and 9 points, 2024, 2020, and 2016. This is a state that I think Democrats saw a huge amount of their gains wiped out in 2024, the decade of advancement that took them from being down 16 against Romney, down 9 against Trump, down 6 in 2020, all wiped out. Just in 2024, with Trump winning the state by 14 points, I think there's a way for Democrats to get within a certainly very competitive range in Texas. I think it takes the right combination of factors. I think it takes Tellerico as the Democratic nominee. I think it takes Paxton as the Republican nominee. Any other type of matchup, I don't know if we see the race as that. It's still a red state. Republicans have the upper hand no matter what the matchup is. The question is margin and down ballot ramifications, especially in some of those more competitive races. We'll see. Texas, for now, though, I think stands out to be as a likely red state for its current status. But the primaries are in March, and in 2 months, we'll have a better idea of who's leading on each side and who might end up being the respective nominee on each side, which could change these races quite dramatically. But that brings the Republicans to 49. The good news for Democrats is that's really where I think they peak at likely states. In my previous prediction, I had Republicans at 50 seats on the likely characterization, meaning that they had the majority pretty much no matter what. It's not as easily said for today, especially at the start of the year. Now, of the remaining 8 toss-ups, Democrats also have their own fair share of likely states. I think, to no one's surprise, states like New Mexico and New Hampshire, are 2 states that Kamala Harris won, Joe Biden won, Hillary Clinton won, Obama won twice. These are states that I don't really think are going to go to the Republican Party, barring, a massive change on the Democratic side. They have a strong candidate in New Mexico on the Democratic side. In New Hampshire, it's an open race. You have Chris Pappas, who is a swing seat Democrat who wins in his district routinely and outperforms the top of the ticket constantly. New Hampshire is going to be a likely Democratic state. New Mexico as well, I think, could border even on the edge of being safe, depending on the Republican matchup in these races. If it's not John Sununu in New Hampshire, easy race for the Democrats to be won by over 15 points. But if it is, going to be a little bit more narrow. In New Hampshire, New Mexico, I think it largely depends. We haven't really seen it shake out to be as tumultuous as some of the other GOP primaries, but we'll have to wait and see who the Republicans nominate. Either way, New Mexico, New Hampshire, good states for the Democrats. I'd feel very comfortable. If I was a Democrat in those races, running for re-election or running for election, they're going to be pretty solid. The other 2 states that you might be shocked to see as likely Democratic states, I think, are birthed out of a fractured Republican Party and lacking leading candidates on the GOP side. In North Carolina, you have Governor Roy Cooper running for Senate in this race. He's never lost a statewide race ever in his electoral history. He's never lost an election either. He has run statewide in every election on the presidential level since 2000, 2004, 2008, 2012, 2016, 2020, and then in 2024, he took that one off because he was retiring from the governor's office. But in every election, barring 2024, he has won on the same ballot that George W. Bush won North Carolina, on the same ballot that Mitt Romney won North Carolina, on the same ballot that Donald Trump won North Carolina twice. This is a state that Republicans, too, have nominated Michael Whatley, essentially. It'll be an interesting primary, but chances are he'll win the nomination. The point is, though, he's a nobody. Has never won a race, ever. Has never run in a race, ever. At most was chairing the National Party on the RNC side and received the endorsement from Donald Trump as a sort of a thank you for the election victory. But I don't know how well I would jump in on that race. I think the Republicans really are at an outsized chance of losing by a tremendous amount. I think that Democrats have everything going for them for the first time in over a decade in North Carolina, and I do think that 2026, of all the years, is going to be the year to capitalize on that and do quite well for themselves in this race. Democrats have won by pretty significant margins in North Carolina in the past. In 2008, you had a very good environment for Democrats on the national level. North Carolina went to Kay Hagan against Elizabeth Dole by roughly 9 points. And so when you think about North Carolina as a state, sure, I do think it's a red state. It is a state that leans more right than left, but there are environments where Democrats can do well. That's North Carolina. And I also see it in Georgia, a state that also voted very similarly in favor of Trump in 2024, but also, too, has a pretty red history. Biden was the first Democrat to win it since 1992, and then it still has a Republican governor. I think this is a state, though, Jon Ossoff is running against really lackluster Republicans. He's in a great position in that race, and it stands to be, at initial value, as a state that Democrats start off with a 5-point advantage with room for growth. Hold that election today. I think Jon Ossoff wins by 6. That is why I have it as a likely Democratic state on the map right now. And so that pretty much rounds out our likely states on both sides of the aisle. Republicans have Florida, Nebraska, Texas, and Alaska. Democrats have New Mexico, New Hampshire, North Carolina, and Georgia. But these final 4 states here are really what is going to make or break the Senate majority. Now, Democrats, I think, should have Michigan in the likely column. The reason they don't is because I think that all of the 3 frontrunners right now, I don't see a clear-cut answer for, who can win this race by the most. I do think that based off current polling, Haley Stevens probably does not rank in as the most electable candidate, but also, too, Michigan is a state that Trump won by 2 in 2024. It's going to be a blue year. I think that whoever Democrats nominate will win the election. The question is margin. Right now, because Haley Stevens leads that Democratic primary and is not doing as well against Mike Rogers in this general election, again, I think come November, and hold it today, Democrats still win the race because they have that influence, they have the advantage in terms of turnout and excitement. But I don't think it's going to be as solid as it should be, and that's something that we should talk about in a future video. But that's the reason in hesitation why I don't have Michigan as a likely Democratic state, even though in 2018 and even in 2022, Democrats did very well for themselves in this state. I don't think that it's going to be as simple, especially with the governor's election, kind of a mess right now with Mike Duggan, but we'll have to wait and see how that shakes out. So 48 seats right now for the Democrats. Michigan rings in as a state that I think Democrats probably with Stevens would win the race by maybe 2 or 3 points, but that brings the Democrats at least with a gain because they flipped North Carolina, which right now is held by Tom Tillis, but Democrats again have that pretty significant advantage in that state. So 48 for the Democrats, 49 for the Republicans, Maine, Ohio, and Iowa. These are the real tricky ones. Republicans are incumbents in all 3. They have an electoral juggernaut in Maine, a retiring incumbent in Iowa, and an appointed incumbent in Ohio, which doesn't really have as much of a factor or a level of influence that helps on the electability standpoint. But these are the states that are really, like I said, going to make or break the 2026 midterms for the Democrats. And I do think that, while Democrats will win Maine, I think with Graham Plattner or Janet Mills, like in Michigan, they could still end up past the finish line. I think that Susan Collins is a very strong candidate. The very strongest of all the candidates we have seen in years past, in many cases, cannot overcome partisanship. And while Maine is a state that has withstood the test of time for Susan Collins, I think I have to remind you that we are in a different political era in 2026 than we were in 2020, than we were in 2014. And even if you take a look at the change in margin, I think it really explains it all. In 2014, Susan Collins won by 35. In 2020, in the first round of ranked choice voting, she won by 8. They never did the final tabulation. There was a Green Party candidate there that got roughly 5% of the vote. I don't doubt that the final margin would have been closer to 5 or 6 points, maybe even 4 points. And I think that would have completely changed the way that people perceived this race, but Maine never counted the ballots after the first round. But what I do think adamantly is that Maine is a state that will push back against Donald Trump's agenda and will elect a Democrat, despite Susan Collins being popular. I think if it was an open race, this would be a 12-point race. Democrats would win it easily, and we wouldn't even have to talk about it. But right now, because Susan Collins is that strong incumbent, we keep it as conversation. I do think, though, today, the Democrats pull ahead, especially after the showings they showed in 2025, in the special elections, in the regular elections, whatever it might be. I think Maine, for now, stands to be a state that Democrats end up winning by a narrow amount, but nonetheless flip the seat from the Republican Party. In these final 2 seats, these are the ones that I've really grappled with the most as of late. I think Iowa is still going to be a state that Republicans win by about 4 or 5 points, but it's narrower than when I had it as a prediction that Republicans were going to win it by 6 or 7. I think that Republicans looking at this race have seen the special elections. They've seen the races get really narrow in Iowa in particular. Democrats have already flipped 2 seats in the Iowa legislature, and they are realizing that of all the states that have been impacted very negatively by Donald Trump's economic policy, Iowa is one of those states. It is the reason and the impetus for why Donald Trump and the White House have this farmers bailout, because they know that their base, especially in states like Iowa, are exceptionally unhappy with the current trajectory of this administration. And I think that Iowa stands to reason to be a state that Democrats could have a chance in, but do not have the highest of odds right now because Democrats have not historically done well in this state. And I think we have to keep that in mind that, yes, there is a right environment for it. And it feels like that environment is brewing. But I don't think we're there yet. And the same, I think, can be said about Ohio, where, yes, Sherrod Brown is a strong candidate, but John Husted, while maybe doesn't have the incumbency factor and it and wow factor that other people do have, he's still running in a state where Donald Trump won the state by 11 and 8 points in both 2020 and 2016. This state has only gotten redder as the years have gone on. And I think that Ohio is a state where, yes, Sherrod Brown has a lot of positive sentiment that is remembered, but also a lot of negative too. That was birthed out of the 2024 campaign season with $100 million focused against him. It was easy to characterize Sherrod across the state on the Senate level just a year ago. And I think it's going to be difficult to substantially redefine that for 2026. Do I think that he could win? Yes. And do I think this race is closer to 1 or 2 points? Yes. But I don't necessarily believe that today this race goes to the Democrats or that they get within less than a point, but that can change. As I stand on it now, though, I think the Republicans win Ohio by roughly 1 or 2 points, bringing their final number to 51 to 49. And across the board, Democrats might flip 2 seats, Maine and North Carolina, but Republicans still hold on to their majority. But it absolutely sets Democrats up well for 2028 to flip Senate control come the next cycle. And it is an interesting map so far with focuses on Iowa, Michigan, Ohio, and Maine, and across the country, with a lot that can change between now and November of this year. But it might not too. With an interesting map that finalizes 51 to 49, a lot to look at over the coming 10 months, 11 months, that will be definitive and certainly fascinating for 2026 and the implications of it far beyond into 2028 and maybe even future elections. We'll have to wait and see. Final map here, GOP 51, Democrats 49. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch and then a playlist for my 2026 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.